Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. You know, it's been one of those weeks, folks.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy. I mean, just crazy between dealing with traffic that's just unbelievable. Seriously, folks, the worst. And trying to keep up with all this China news. I'm ready for a sip of something strong.
Well, speaking of China, the sources you sent over really highlight this interesting tension, between China's economic ambitions and their growing national pride.
You mean those little pinks?
Right. Exactly.
The ones who are all over social media talking about how China's going to rule the world.
Exactly. And there's this fascinating video analysis by this YouTuber, this guy Otua.
Oh, yeah.
He breaks down how these nationalistic views, they're often amplified online, but they sometimes clash with the realities on the ground in China.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So this YouTuber, what was his name again?
Okyo, yeah.
He does these insightful deep dives into Chinese social media trends.
Right.
So he's got this video where he's analyzing this argument between a young guy, one of those little pinks,
right,
and a taxi driver.
Right.
Right. And it's all about China's place in the world, how great China is, all that jazz.
It's a really interesting window into the different perspectives within China. The young man is clearly fired up about China's growing power and their influence on the world stage.
Yeah, he's not afraid to say it.
No.
China's #1. We're going to be the superpower. Everyone's going to respect us.
Right.
That kind of stuff.
And this pride is often tied to a strong sense of nationalism, a belief that China is destined to reclaim its historical position as a leading global power.
But the taxi driver, he's not buying it right.
Right.
He's more focused on the day-to-day struggles of living in China.
Exactly. The taxi driver brings up issues like corruption, economic inequality, and the challenges of just trying to make a living.
Yeah.
It's a stark contrast to the young man's very idealistic view of China's rise.
It's like they're living in two different worlds, even though they're both in China.
Yeah.
You've got the little pinks living in this online world where China's already a superpower.
Right.
And then you've got people like the taxi driver dealing with the real world problems that haven't gone away.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example of how online narratives, especially those that are driven by nationalism, can sometimes disconnect from the lived experiences of many people within a country.
So this little pink in the video, he's going on and on about how strong China is. He's even talking about this wolf warrior diplomacy thing.
Yes.
Which sounds pretty intense.
Wolf warrior diplomacy has become a shorthand way of describing China's more assertive and confrontational approach to foreign policy in recent years.
Okay.
It's a shift away from the more cautious and low-key approach they took in the past.
So basically, China's not afraid to flex its muscles anymore, right?
Yeah.
They're ready to throw their weight around on the world stage.
It's definitely a more assertive stance. They're challenging international norms, pushing back against criticism, and using their economic and military power to advance their interests.
Okay, so China is feeling pretty good about itself, ready to take on the world. But what about Taiwan?
Right.
Because that seems to be a real sticking point for these little pinks.
Absolutely. The Taiwan issue is highly charged and emotionally loaded for many in China, especially among those who subscribe to this strong sense of national pride.
Yeah, I bet. This kid in the video, he was like, Taiwan belongs to China. They need to come back to the motherland. Like, really fired up about it.
That sentiment is widespread in China. The government has consistently maintained that Taiwan is a breakaway province that must eventually be reunified with the mainland.
But Taiwan has its own government, its own military, its own everything. They're not just going to roll over and say, okay, China, you're in charge now.
It's a complex situation with a long and contested history. Taiwan has developed its own distinct identity and democratic system, and many people there don't want to be part of China.
It's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
China's saying, you belong to us.
Yeah.
And Taiwan's like, no way, we're our own thing.
And this tension plays out in various ways. Military posturing, economic pressure, information warfare, and even cultural influence campaigns.
It's a real mess. But what's interesting is that this little pink in the video, he seems to have this kind of contradictory view of Taiwan. He's talking about how Taiwan needs to be reunified with China, but he's also saying stuff like Taiwan is weak and needs China's protection. It's like, make up your mind, buddy.
That's a great observation, and it speaks to a common theme in how China often portrays Taiwan simultaneously as a breakaway province that must be brought back into the fold, and as a vulnerable entity that needs China's guidance and protection.
It's like a weird, twisted family drama playing out on the world stage.
A family drama with some pretty high stakes, considering the potential for military conflict and the global economic impact.
Speaking of economic impact, let's not forget about trade. Because that seems to be another area where China's national pride is coming into play. I mean, they're not just talking tough, they're actually taking action.
Right. We've seen examples of China using its economic leverage as a tool of diplomacy, whether it's restricting exports of critical materials targeting specific companies or even leveraging its massive consumer market.
Yeah, they're not afraid to play hardball. Like that whole thing with Skydio, the American drone company.
Right.
They got their battery supplies cut off because they were selling drones to Taiwan. Talk about a power move.
It was a clear signal that China is willing to use its economic clout to punish companies in countries that don't align with its political goals.
Oh, yeah.
And it sent a chill through a lot of boardrooms around the world.
I bet it did. No one wants to get on China's bad side, especially if it means losing access to that massive market. But on the other hand, companies don't want to be seen as bowing down to China's pressure either. It's a tough spot to be in.
It's a delicate balancing act for companies trying to navigate these geopolitical tensions while also protecting their business interests.
It's a real tightrope walk, that's for sure. And the stakes are only getting higher as China gets more powerful and more assertive on the world stage. You know, this whole situation, it reminds me of something. It reminds me
Of what? What are you thinking of?
It reminds me of that time I went to a casino in Atlantic City.
Okay.
And I sat down at the blackjack table.
Wait, hold on. How does a casino in Atlantic City relate to China's national pride and trade strategy?
Just hear me out, folks. So I'm at this blackjack table, right? And the guy next to me, he's got this huge stack of chips. I mean, like a mountain of chips. And he's betting big, winning some, losing some. But he's not afraid to take risks.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm still not seeing the connection to China.
Hold your horses. I'm getting there. So this guy, he's playing it fast and loose, right? And he keeps saying, I'm feeling lucky tonight, I'm going to win big. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's either a genius or he's about to lose his shirt.
Okay, so maybe he's like China, feeling confident and willing to gamble on big moves.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. China, they're like this high roller at the blackjack table. They're betting big on their economy, their military, their global influence.
Yeah.
And they're not afraid to take risks.
That's an interesting analogy, but like any high roller, they need to be careful not to overplay their hand. There are always risks involved in these big bets, and the consequences of losing can be significant.
You got that right.
Yeah.
But right now, China, they're feeling lucky. They're on a winning streak, and they're not about to back down from a challenge.
It's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out in the long run. Will China be able to maintain this momentum, or will they eventually face a reckoning?
Only time will tell, folks. But one thing's for sure. This China story, it's a real nail-biter. We're going to take a quick sip break, but don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with more on China trade and national pride. All right, folks, we're back. And before the break, we were talking about China's big gamble. You know, they're going all in on becoming a global superpower, folks.
And like any high-stakes game, you know, there are winners and losers, and sometimes those lines get blurred.
Yeah.
You know, especially when we're talking about the human impact of these global power plays.
That's right. It's not just about, you know, abstract economic theories or political strategies.
Right.
It's about real people's lives. You know, workers, families, entire communities that are affected by these decisions made, you know, in distant boardrooms and government offices.
Exactly. Think about the taxi driver in that video we were discussing earlier. He's just trying to make a living, navigate the challenges of daily life in China, and probably doesn't have the time or energy to get caught up in these grand narratives of national pride and global dominance.
He's more concerned with putting food on the table and getting his kid to school on time than he is with whether China's going to overtake America as the world superpower.
Right.
And honestly, I can relate to that. Stuck in traffic for an hour, just trying to get across town. The last thing on my mind is international trade deals or geopolitical strategy.
It's a good reminder that for most people, life is about dealing with the immediate realities of their own circumstances.
Yeah.
And those realities often get overlooked when we talk about these big picture issues.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and the political rhetoric and forget about the human cost of these policies. But that's what we're trying to do here on Sip and Talk. Put it back down to earth, folks.
And it's not just the taxi drivers of the world who are impacted.
Right.
Think about the workers in industries that are caught in the crossfire of these trade wars. You know, their jobs, their livelihoods are on the line.
Right, like those folks who work in factories that depend on exports to the U.S.
Yeah.
If China starts slapping tariffs on American goods, you know, those factories might have to shut down and those workers lose their jobs.
It's a ripple effect that can be devastating for communities that depend on those industries.
And it's not just about jobs. It's about the cost of goods going up for everyone. I mean, if China's putting tariffs on American products, that means we're going to have to pay more for stuff here at home, and that hurts everyone's wallets, folks.
It's a classic example of how these trade wars can end up hurting the very people they're supposed to help.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the impact on innovation and technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, China and the U.S., they're both competing to be the leaders in fields like artificial intelligence, robotics, and clean energy.
Right. And those are the industries that are going to shape the future, create jobs, and drive economic growth.
Yeah.
But if these countries are too busy fighting each other, it could stifle innovation and slow down progress.
It's like they're both cutting off their noses despite their faces.
Yeah.
They need to find a way to cooperate and compete at the same time, because the whole world benefits from a rising tide.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a great point. It's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
There's room for both countries to succeed and for the global economy to benefit from their innovations.
But that requires trust dialogue and a willingness to find common ground. And right now, with all this talk about trade wars and national pride, it seems like those things are in short supply.
It's definitely a challenging environment, but there are still voices both in China and the U.S. who are advocating for cooperation and understanding.
Yeah, and those voices need to be amplified, folks, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. Whether you're a taxi driver in Beijing or a factory worker in Ohio, we all want the same things: a good job, a safe community, a decent life for ourselves and our families.
That's a powerful message, and it's one that transcends national boundaries and political ideologies.
And it's a message that needs to be heard loud and clear, folks, because if we don't start focusing on what unites us, we're all going to lose.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for another sip, don't you?
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to process.
Let's take a moment to reflect on the human side of this China story, folks, and remind ourselves that behind the headlines and the political posturing, there are real people whose lives are being impacted. I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. Welcome back to Sip&Talk. You know, as we've been discussing China's rise and their economic influence and national pride, it's clear they're playing a long game and
Oh, yeah.
they're not afraid to shake things up.
You got that right. It's like they're saying, hey, world, yeah, we're here. We're big.
Yeah.
And we're not going to play by your rules anymore.
And that shift in attitude is creating ripples across the globe, impacting everything from trade and technology to geopolitics and even cultural trends.
Absolutely. It's like everyone's trying to figure out how to deal with this new China, this China that's not afraid to throw its weight around and challenge the status quo.
It's forcing countries and companies to rethink their strategies and adapt to this new reality.
You know, it reminds me of when Japan was on the rise back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone was freaking out about Japan Inc.
Right.
and how they were going to take over the world.
There are certainly parallels to be drawn between Japan's economic ascendance in the latter half of the 20th century and China's current trajectory.
Everyone was talking about Japanese management techniques and how they were so efficient and innovative, and American companies were scrambling to catch up.
It led to a period of intense competition and also some soul-searching in the West about how to maintain economic dominance.
Exactly. And now it's China's turn. Everyone's obsessed with understanding how China works, how they think, what their long-term goals are.
It's essential to move beyond simplistic narratives and develop a nuanced understanding of China's complexities.
Yeah, because if we just react out of fear or ignorance, we're going to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
We need to be smart, we need to be strategic, and we need to figure out how to engage with China in a way that benefits everyone.
Finding a balance between cooperation and competition will be crucial for navigating the U.S.-China relationship in the 21st century.
It's a delicate dance for sure. But you know what, folks? I'm optimistic. I think we can figure this out.
I share your optimism. Open dialogue, mutual understanding, and a commitment to finding common ground are essential for building a more stable and prosperous future.
Well said. And on that note, folks, it's time to wrap up this deep dive on China. It's been a real eye-opener, hasn't it?
It certainly has. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope it's given our listeners a deeper understanding of China's complexities.
Absolutely. And if you're still thirsty for more knowledge, folks, remember to check out Micky's YouTube channel. He's got all the latest on wine travel and those crazy wolf warrior movies everyone's talking about.
And before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. Can China truly become a global superpower without embracing democratic values and respecting human rights?
Ooh, that's a good one. Something to think about, folks. And with that, we bid you farewell from Sip and Talk. Until next time, stay curious and keep sipping.
Cheers to that.